Two. Mm, mm, mm. Hello, Global Theater. My name is Jerry Fialka. Today is January 11, 2023. We want to thank Rob Grant and his amazing podcast. I'm probably wrong about everything. It's truly an honor and a pleasure for you to join us in our Werner Herzog Salon. We've got Rob Dew, Mike Sakamoto, Patrick McGee. Damien, pronounce your last name.
Villarreal.
Whoa, and Courtney Sells, right, Courtney, with an S?
Yeah.
At both ends.
No, just in the first. Sell.
Just in the first. Sell, excuse me. Courtney Sell. I interviewed this young filmmaker, and he brought up Herzog, and I thought, well, why don't we have a Herzog Salon? So we're going to jump right into it and try to get deep and talk about a lot of ideas. And I was fortunate enough to screen the American premiere of Aguirre Wrath of God. How appropriate, Rob, for you to have Kinski's eyes staring at us, because I was in Ann Arbor, Michigan, and we were renting films from New Yorker Films Distribution in New York. And one of our members of our film group was a Herzog freak, Lonnie Ruman. And so we followed Herzog from early on, and he had this new film. And I says, okay, we'll book it on this date. And the guy goes, well, it hasn't even played in New York yet. Well, I'll give you the U.S. premiere. And I goes, fine. So if you don't believe it, it's going to be in a book called The History of Cinema in Ann Arbor. It sounds like a scam job, but eventually we brought Herzog to campus, sat around and talked to him at lunches, kind of friendly guy. And then for 30, 40 years later, I saw him at an Academy screening, reading a book all alone in the lobby before the film started, and went up to him and reminded him this. And he just said, like, get away from me, kid. You bother me. Like, he was really like, oh, okay, thank you. I got to get back to reading my book and being solitude. So then during the screening, I asked him a question. I said, you know, Peter Greenaway says cinema is much too rich a medium to be left to storytellers, blah, blah, blah. And then he just ripped Peter Greenaway a new asshole. He goes, he didn't even answer the question, really. So, of course, we know Werner is very articulate and an amazing filmmaker. And it's not for us to be fanboys here or me to lead a Werner Herzog bitch club. But at that screening of Aguirre, or when we were showing Herzog films in Ann Arbor 45 years ago, it was known that he stole a camera to make his first film or an early film. So I said to him, and it's probably on reel-to-reel black and white video tape somewhere, I asked him, do you encourage film students to steal cameras? And whatever he said, I don't remember. I'm sorry. But one more little anecdote, sorry about this, is I know someone who couldn't afford to go to a Herzog filmmaking workshop. Have you gone, Courtney? Have you paid for one?
No.
Okay. So one of the filmmakers I've interviewed, Theo Anthony, did it, and he, you know, got his money's worth. He sits there and pays money, and Herzog teaches him about filmmaking. And this guy in LA didn't have the money to attend. So he went up to the table and he saw the pass on the woman who's, you know, giving out the, you know, the okay to come in and do the workshop. And he shot it secretly with his camera, went to the Xerox place, made a fake pass, got in, attended the workshop. And at the end of the workshop, he raised his hand and he told Herzog he did that. And Herzog was pissed. So it's like an ironic thing. He's saying, you know, and this is what best thing I learned from Frank Zappa is embrace contradiction. So, you know, he's a businessman. He's giving you a workshop and expecting you to pay. But early in his career, he says, you know, steal your camera. So there's a little irony there. So we'll go round robin. The first question is property theft? Rob, we'll start with you. There's an old line, property is theft. is property theft, Rob? And you could, my questions might be open-ended, so you can bring it into Herzog if you want, or film.
A little.
Yeah.
I mean, certainly the Native Americans, or rather, excuse me, indigenous peoples of America would say that, you know, there was these same notions did not exist. I suppose there were hunting grounds over which some ownership was taken. I would say this sure seems like theft when you don't have a lot of it.
Very good. Mike, you're up.
Sure. I mean, stealing property is theft. The way that you put it, property is theft. I don't know if I can accept that, but stealing property, sure.
Good. You're adding a verb to the statement. I didn't say property is theft. I think it's some famous saying, but I'm sorry, I'm not quoting it. But that's good. This is what I want. I want to be, just because I word a question or round robin thought, it's us rewording it, psychoanalyzing the wording. Patrick, you're up.
Well, I think the institution of private property is theft in many ways. By the way, I can't think of the guy's name, but he's French, 19th century, sometimes thought of as a theorist of anarchy. Who said that?
Guy Debord.
No, it's not him. That's much more recent. I mean, this is like 19th century. You know, same time as Marx. Marx knew the guy.
Okay. It's
didn't like him very much. But,
yeah, 19th century French guy. Okay, sorry. Go ahead.
I wish I could think of the name, but but I mean, I think of it in this way. I don't think even Marx thought that possessions inherently were necessarily theft. You know, like if you're living in a hut, you have to live somewhere. It's your hut. You know, you're going to protect it from animals and other people who want to take your stuff. But when you have an institution where, you know, for example, you claim ownership of words, of concepts, of scientific discoveries, and things like that, it does become a kind of theft, you know, in the sense that, you know, whoever discovers something doesn't really own it, because it really is either a scientific reality, which should belong to the people, to everybody, just as medicine should belong to everybody, you know, medical care and so forth and so on. So I think in that sense, yeah, I think property is theft, but not simple possession. You know, like if you have a pen, you know, you're not necessarily stealing it from somebody else.
Very good, Patrick. Thank you. Damien, go ahead.
Yeah, I think it just needs a lot of qualifiers. So we're referring to private property or anything else? Because I mean, you could, you know, some people would say that they own their body. You know, are they body or that they own it? Is it their property? You know, so you know, in the ultimate, you know, most simple way of defining it, no, but you know, this question just needs to be parsed out and qualified to really get to a
yeah, well, that's what we're here for. So that was good, Damien, because it reminded me of great Michael Shields, our friend for 40 years on these kind of salons, said we should be selling our data instead of them stealing it and telling us what, you know, we should buy next. We should sell it. So, Courtney, thanks again for initiating the thought of this mess. You're up. Go ahead.
Yeah, that is a tricky one. I would have to say, like, it makes me think a lot about like intellectual property and like the pirating of ideas, and especially how we're talking about kind of bringing it back to like in the realm of filmmaking ideas and the fact that we deal with piracy of cinematic ideas and the theft of ideas. So I would say so. Yeah, I would say that it goes, but it's like everyone else has been saying, it's kind of like a fine line, because are we dealing with like private property, material property, or, you know, ideas? And so it is a tricky one.
Yeah. We're going to go back around and start with Courtney on the next, but I'm just going to, and it's going to follow up and apply it directly to Herzog. But I'm going to tell you, Frank Zappa was talking about genius once, and he says, Genius is someone who plagiarizes and you can't tell that they stole it or who they stole it from. And T.S. Eliot said the mature poet steals and the immature poet imitates. And Harold Bloom's whole thing is anxiety of influences. You absorb your influences and then you abandon them. And it's sort of unique what Herzog has done with over 200 or 300 films in doing the short film, the long film documentary, the sort of more slick documentaries now. If you watched, his most recent doc, one of his most recent docs, The Fire Within, he makes it with another guy. And it's like, kind of slick PBS-y kind of thing, but it still has that Herzog coloring. So did he absorb somebody and then abandon it and create his own? And intellectual property is amazing. Intellectual property is bullshit in a lot of ways because Oscar Wilde nailed it. He says everything is in public domain. So everything's up. Hold on one second, Rob. Everything's up to be stolen. Who gives anyone a right to sell water or dirt? And then once you create words, who gives you a right to own words? But somebody want to say, hey, I wrote this song, so when you sell it and make money, give me a cut. Go ahead, Rob.
Well, I was going to say, a way of maybe bringing this back into Herzog would be maybe to briefly discuss Grizzly Man, where he takes essentially the work of someone else, documentary work of the Grizzly Man, the aforementioned, and transforms it into the film. Maybe some of the greater Herzog scholars would know exactly how that process transformed, but he totally puts his whole stamp on it with his voiceover. I mean, it becomes a Herzog film from being someone else's document. All the better for it. Courtney, take it.
Go ahead, Courtney.
That's a great point. And also, I did read, I either read or heard it in an interview, that not only did he use Timothy Treadwell, Grizzly Man's footage to make that film, but a different filmmaker actually was working on it in an editing studio right next to where Herzog was working, and that filmmaker had Herzog come over to look at what he was doing, and Herzog fell so much in love with it that he deemed that it was now going to be his film. So he took the project from this other filmmaker.
Yeah.
So the story goes.
Did he break him?
I don't know the details of it, but he's open about how he saw that he needed to make this film, so he took it from this other filmmaker and they worked out a deal. So it's quite interesting because it's kind of double tier now, because it was someone else's film making a film about someone else's films, and now Herzog is the third person to be working it.
But let's just go from the teacher standpoint for next round robin and follow up. Perfect comment, Rob, to fill this out, flush it out bigger, is that Schrader's teaching at UCLA and his student brings up the idea for blue collar, and then supposedly he just rips it and makes his first film, based on some student's thought. Whatever, everything's in public domain. You're like, no, you ripped me off. So all that is court shit. It's feeding lawyers money. And then Shakespeare said, kill all lawyers. Hey, I'm for the court systems. They work supposedly and they don't work. But in essence, art should be a free donation. That's what Mike Kelly says. Art is the last domain to freedom. That's where you can do anything. And McLuhan and Worrell both said art is anything you can get away with. So Courtney will go to you and then go around. If you were teaching a film class, would you encourage your kids to take Herzog, a god of filmmaker, and take his thing and go steal your first camera?
Yeah, I mean, I wouldn't encourage them to break the law to get in trouble, but I would definitely stress to do what you feel is necessary, as long as it doesn't bring harm to others, to get
no harm to others. Yeah,
no harm to others, but in a physical way, I guess. But yeah, I would actually quite encourage doing whatever needs to be done, because it should. because I think that's what like Herzog must push on this too. That's where passion comes from. If you have the passion to go as far as you think you can to make your work, and he preaches that all the time, I think that's that weeds the men from the boys, if you will.
Yeah. Very good. Damien, you got the question? You want me to repeat it?
Repeat it, please.
If you were a film teacher, would you tell your students, take Herzog as an example? He said, steal a camera to make your first film if you have to. Something like that, he said.
Yeah, that echoes I'd echo what was just said about, those that, have that passion or that drive, that belief in their project, are the ones that really will go through with it. So, they'll, that's who the message is for. But I think the more interesting part, though, about the idea of art and theft, though, comes to the question. It might have been hinted at before I arrived, but about all this AI stuff going on, because that is a major controversy going on. Where stealing a camera, that's kind of separate from the larger question of stealing an art, where now that's just a question about, do you steal this tool, this object, or do you steal intellectual or artistic property, which is what's going on with all this AI stuff. And I really don't have a good answer to it. But that's really the major issue. I think that's happening and will only grow.
It's one of the major issues. Very good, Damien. Patrick, how many years were you a professor? You're not teaching now, are you?
No.
How many?
I guess 41.
41.
I wasn't really a professor for 41 years. I was a professor for 31 years.
That's pretty dang good. We're honored to have you here. So would you have ever said that to your students?
No. Well, for one thing, because I could get into a lot of trouble if that got out. So, you have to think about things like that in an institution. But on the other hand, like there are certain stories I wouldn't tell my students, and there's certain things I wouldn't say here right now that I have done. That are things that like I'll imply it, okay, like Jerry Rubin or Hoffman or one of those guys wrote "Steal This Book." Remember back in the late 60s or 70s or something. I mean, there were times. Well, I will tell this story. I was once working at a public library, shelving books. This is like when I was 19 or something. And they put me up in these stacks, and I was just shifting books around, reorganizing it. And I found these these were all old books. They weren't available downstairs, to be checked out. Okay. And I found these crisp, clean, fresh copies of Rosa Luxemburg's treatises, on, economics and, revolution and so forth. And I decided to liberate them.
Great work.
Because they obviously got them out of the way because they didn't want people reading that stuff. And, so do I feel bad about it? I wouldn't want to have been caught. But so no, I wouldn't advise students to do it, but I would understand if a student did what they have to do. And I certainly, students and everybody, I bet everyone here has maybe copied some music offline or done something, and technically what you're stealing somebody's profit margin.
Yeah. But
if I could just make a quick point, you have to make a distinction, I think, between, compensation, and I don't mean compensation the way the term, the word literally implies, but distribution of wealth, i.e., everybody's working at one thing or another, and somehow they have to live. And we do have a monetary system, and it's hard to imagine a system that would not have some mechanisms, such as a monetary system. You have to distinguish between that and property as power, control, over what other people do, what other people can think, what other people can say, and so forth and so on. And that, to me, is what you're getting into when you're talking about private property as a social institution, legal institution as well.
It's really good, Patrick. Thank you. Okay, Mike, you're up.
Yeah, thinking about this question, I hate to think of all the entitled film students who took him at his literal word. Not good advice. But I think, like Courtney said, Herzog, especially the young Herzog, often spoke, hyperbolically, and to make a point, you have to want to make a film so badly that you would even steal a camera to do it. And, you have to want to make a film so badly that you would learn how to pick locks to put,
Good.
I don't know, somewhere to shoot something. That's the wisdom I take from those words. But the young Herzog is different from later Herzog. The later Herzog's a little bit more chill, a little bit more wise, a little bit more calm, But I love the young Herzog too.
Yeah. But Mike, you brought up a good word. What's hyperbolically mean just in layperson's term? What's that word mean?
Just steal a camera if you need to make a film,
Yeah.
Exaggeration.
I would kill to make this film.
That's what I mean.
But you raised a lot of good points there. And we'll get into that.
But Jerry,
Go ahead.
you like to quote Herzog. You like to quote Herzog saying, "I would bleed for cinema."
Yeah.
Haven't I heard you say that before?
Yes.
Something like that.
Yeah. But it's very interesting
We love
because
it when Herzog talks that way.
Yeah.
Or
That is-
I'll go to hell and fight the devil and wrestle my film out of his hands,
If necessary.
That's what he said. Yeah. But the thing is bleed for cinema or do that. I would do that. He's talking metaphorically. And the Cecil Taylor, the jazz pianist, actually plays his piano so hard that he bleeds. So he's not doing this metaphorically. He is putting that sort of effort into it. So that's going to be our next round question. But Rob, you've taught film for how many years?
15 or so, 20.
Okay. Well, how would you handle that question?
I would never say it to the student in a public setting or if I knew he was recording me, but beyond that, sure.
Yeah.
No, I respect everyone's statements, and of course they're correct. But I do want to give a nod to, and Mike is completely right. It's hyperbole, which makes for great quotes, and it's also what we love about Herzog. It's the gonzo attitude, it's the belligerent overstatement, it's the and of course the narratives around his films and the making of his films. So we've sort of brought up this idea of property, and so I mean he has an ownership of his films in that. I'm thinking of course of Aguirre and Space Cadet. The other film begins with a C.
Cobra Verde?
Fitzcarraldo, excuse me. Anyway, those films are so experiential. He isn't making a film just about the things, about these subjects, particularly in a studio. He's going through the experience. So there's a property, there's an ownership thing that's going on there. And then I'll pass it in just a second. But I was going to say, we keep dancing around this issue of intellectual property, which is a little off from Herzog. But I mean, that is the issue here. And that is what I would say is intellectual property is theft to creative energy and the creative process. And then I'll pass to Courtney.
Yeah. Go ahead, Courtney.
Yeah, I just wanted to make mention too, because we're kind of talking about the quotes that Herzog has used and being hyperbole. What's really interesting that I'm sure we would touch upon it later, but also he was someone, at least young Herzog, which we also admire, who definitely walked the walk. In stories of him making Heart of Glass, he had pneumonia and he decided to prove to his actors that he was dedicated. So he jumped underneath a whole sheet of ice in a pond and swam to the other side of the ice and gave himself near hypothermia. Or even Dwarves Started Small, he jumps into a cactus to show that he's not exploiting his performers, and that he'll put himself in pain and agony to prove to them that he's dedicated in making this kind of film. And even putting his entire cast and crew in a Lucifer when they go to the volcano that's about to explode. So he definitely, young Herzog definitely made those crazy statements, but he definitely like has proven himself to also walk the walk in that sense, you know.
It's brilliant, Courtney, because I just was watching an interview with him in recent years, the old Herzog, if you want to say. Oh, here, let me let Mike back in. And I was watching this clip of Herzog talk recently, and he said, there's never been an actor on my set who's been injured or killed. There's been crew people. So, you know, and it was very interesting how he took such pride. And this is the next question is he's Bavarian. And it finds me, and this is German or whatever that, I don't know. I'm not trying to falsely generalize how people are, but my friend Bleeker Bob from New York, who sold all the rock stars all their shit, he said, I'm not an asshole. I'm from New York. And I love that statement because that's sort of like barbarians, you know, in my opinion. What I know of them, they're just hard assy kind of wannabe, they're whatever the adjective is, I'm losing it, but you know what I'm saying. That's how he is. He wasn't snobbish to me. I had a perfect Herzog topic for him to do a movie of, and I can remember the restaurant we're sitting at, and it was a guy whose mom died because the radio fell in her bathtub and she died of electricity, and then he never took a bath for the rest of his life, but he fixed everybody's in the little towns their radio, and he fixed our old antique radio once. He was called Joe Smallbones. I says, I have a great guy you could do a documentary on, and he just sort of snubbed it like that, you know, like I want to find my own subject. I don't want people to say, oh, you're the weird filmmaker who will do this. So he was just being so. Is the artist more self-expression? Is Herzog expressing himself and his inner authenticity or whatever you want to call that? Or is he more a vehicle for whatever technologies, cultures, and environments are dominant that he's living in? I know it's both and it depends, but it's just a jumping off point. We'll start with you, Patrick. So more self-expression or more vehicle?
Well, I'm going to have to go with self-expression, I think, because this distinction he makes in those comments you sent out, you know, about between facts and truths, and one could relate documentaries and art film or whatever. He clearly is interested in style and in technique, even though his technique in his films is very reminiscent of documentary and cinema verite, which he's putting down in those comments. Even Aguirre feels like a documentary, you know, in style, but you know, it is expression, because that, to me, that's the essence of style. That's the essence of articulation, you know, and it does more than just give you a fact. It gives it in a certain context, a certain form that provokes thought, you know. And so I'm going to go with style, with the self-expression. Yeah,
I like you changing the word. That's what it's all about. And I'm glad you brought up, you know, cinema verite is fly in the soup. Direct cinema is fly on the wall. So Damien, you're up. Is Herzog a little more self-expression or a little more vehicle, medium?
Annoying answer, but you know, compared to his contemporaries, of course, self-expression. In the larger canon, you know, that's harder to say. You know, and all of everything, all art, because he could have been a totally different, you know, artist and a different, you know, if the film wasn't around.
Well, good, Damien. But when you say his contemporaries, just stay on that for a second. You saying Earl Morris or Agnes Varda or Marker, or who are you? Or you mean Vim Bender?
Yeah. Any other filmmaker?
Yeah.
You know, within his generation.
Yeah. Yeah, because I love that story of Fassbinder hugging him, and they were like, anyways, you heard that, Courtney. That's hilarious. So, because he's like, you're part of the new German cinema. And we were showing all those guys in Ann Arbor in the mid 70s, and Wim Wenders showed up, and we nicknamed him One Wonders. It was like, I mean, it's okay. He's so overrated. Anyway, I know he's good, blah, blah, blah. Okay, Courtney, you're up.
I mean, especially young Herzog, I definitely have to lean towards self-expression, because reading a lot of his writing, especially his book of Walking in Ice, where he walks from Germany to, I think, Bavaria to Paris to meet Lottie Eisner so she won't die. And he journals his trek, which I think took him about a month or so, maybe longer. And his writing is equally as poetic as the visuals in his films. And it's really well known that in his early works, let's take Aguirre and Fitzcarraldo, his more famous works, the landscapes generally are an expression of, the mental anguish that the characters are going through, and it's sheer poetry. And also I believe that, especially in Signs of Life, his first feature, the character Strozek definitely reminds me of a young Herzog. He definitely is putting himself in that situation. And so I think it's and there's a lot of later documentaries and films that he had done in the early 90s that deal with his interest in Catholicism and Christianity. And so it's almost like a lot of his films, you can track his interests and his developments and like what he's interested in through the spot of his films, the track record of his films. So I would say it's like a lot of self-expression. And even with his modern stuff, the one about the internet, it seems like it's still elements of self-expression. The monks with their cell phones, and he adds his like voiceovers on it. I mean, it's brilliant.
Dude, the internet film Herzog did is so informative, just teaching you about electric cars. Really good point, Courtney. Thank you for knowing all this, dropping all these details. Damien, you had something to add before we go to Mike and Rob.
Yeah, actually, thinking back, so was the question, with regard to, his technology and stuff being influenced, would that also include his background and everything else like that? Because I think his life story is extremely influential onto how he became the filmmaker that he is. And, is that part of his style? Is that something inherent inside of him? Or is that something that, is an outside influence on him?
Well, that's what this series is about, is inventing new questions. It's not me asking a question and everybody answers it. It's inventing a new question or a new metaphor out of it. So you guys all get this, and that's great. But why we got you, Damien, on that? What was the Herzog Finnegan's Wake thing? Before I forget,
he just said he thought Finnegan's Wake was overrated because he had known someone who had had some kind of life story or journal that, like, he translated it, and so it was full of all kinds of errors and different things, and he's like, oh, this is way better than Finnegan's Wake. Finnegan's Wake is bloated and this and that.
He's counterculturally correct. It is bloated. It's supposed to be bloated. Bloated up your butt, buddy. Okay, Mike, that was good, Damien. Mike, you're up. You know the question, or you want me to repeat it?
Yeah, can you repeat it? I've been dropping in now.
That's all right. It's basically, is Herzog a little more self-expression or more a vehicle for whatever technologies, cultures are dominant in his life? I know it's both and it depends, but just your...
Right. I only caught half of what you said, Courtney, but you started mentioning his writing other than film writing.
Yeah.
I've always thought of Herzog as an artist of, pure self-expression, and he said something somewhere where he said, if you really want to know me as an artist, you'll have to read my books, because too many people, collaborators' hands get, onto the film work that you're making. But if you really want to hear my true voice, read my writing. And didn't he just publish a novel this year?
Yeah, he did.
It'd be interesting to see. Yeah, but I am familiar with Walking on Ice. That's a great book.
Yeah. Thanks, Mike. Okay, Rob.
Well, I think the answer is self-expression. I feel as though everyone's covered it pretty thoroughly. So I'm going to direct the question and say the thing that stands out to me about him, which has sort of been hit on by other gentlemen here, would be the thirst for life. It's the just grabbing life in all its forms by the horns and just going for it. I mean, that to me is the Herzog spirit, and that's expressed in the films, in the topics. I mean, that's obviously why Grizzly Man attracted him, because he was like, "Now this guy's crazier than I am," and all throughout his narrative and his story, sure, the self-expression, but him as a figure, almost a mythic figure, who lives in a way like sort of the heroes we see in old Western movies. He is cinematic in the conduct of his life, and I think that's just the thing I wanted to mention.
Okay, but let's flip it, Rob. Where do you think that came from? The way he was raised, on some willpower as a kid? He talks about how he didn't have any electricity as a kid, or, he lived that hard life. Where do you think it more came from? How he was raised, his DNA, or his environment? Go ahead, Rob.
Well, two things. I'd like to hear maybe from Damien about his life. I'm not familiar with that information. And then second, I'd be curious, and maybe we could even discuss it, to what extent his Germanness. I mean, is he a archetypical German filmmaker, and what is that? What does that mean? I'd be curious the gentleman's thought on that.
Yeah, Damien and then Courtney, because you guys go ahead, Damien.
Well, yeah. So I actually wanted to bring this up too. Was that he did? He is this idiosyncratic filmmaker, but he grew up in this very idiosyncratic way in post-war Germany. Not even seeing a movie until he was like a teenager, using a telephone, and I think that has massive effects on how he came to be and the way his imagination was able to grow. And I think it'd be very hard for him to grow up in a Herzog like that, to grow up in a different environment. But he grew up in post-war Germany. But the funny thing is, he's Bavarian. From what I understand, Bavarians are kind of like the Californians of Germany, where they don't quite identify with the rest of the country. They kind of have their own thing.
More like Texans, I would think.
Maybe, I don't really know. I had heard Californian. At least a Californian related to a Texan, we could put it that way. But yeah, it seems like a lot of Germans. I know Nietzsche did the same thing. He identified as Polish rather than German. But
why is Nietzsche more German, or is he?
I think he had a Polish grandmother or something, and he just as he was, he didn't quite identify with the German identity.
Yeah, I'm Polish. You hear about the Polish carpool? They all decided to meet at the office. Go ahead, Rob.
Just jumping off really quick from Damon. I mean, right away, the thing that's really interesting, a German artist post-war, and I've, in my experiences with German, particularly men, I think that post-war identity, that villainization of Germany and German masculinity that occurred, I'm sure had a tremendous effect on any person that came out of that. And maybe his thrust, his toxic masculine thrust in every situation towards sort of seizing the reins grows out of that passing.
Well, I think he was the opposite. He was a very sensitive child or not sensitive, but I think he identifies, at least he said in interviews, that he grew up, very sensitive and, was into this and that. He had these brothers. His father wasn't in his life at all, really. So I don't know.
Okay,
Courtney,
Courtney, that was really good diversion. Courtney has something to say, and Courtney, incorporate too on why in the heck you asked us to watch that short film by him, because I have a comment on it after you tell us that. But go ahead.
So first of all, to Rob's point about Herzog, like kind of having that thirst for life and loving characters, I have that thirst for life. It's actually quite interesting. If you ever read the book Herzog on Herzog, he speaks about how he grew up in his earliest years. He didn't actually dream of becoming a filmmaker or an artist at any point. He wanted to become a ski flyer, such as why he did that documentary, The Great Woodcarver Steiner, The Great Ecstasy of Woodcarver Steiner, about the ski flyer, because he felt like he wanted to be more of an athlete, and he could relate to that, because he always felt that the ski flyers were the people that had the most, quote, guts. They had more guts than anyone that he could figure. So he was really obsessed with Woodcarver Steiner, I can't remember actually, obviously not Rudolf Steiner. And what's also interesting too is you were talking about that kind of like macho attitude. When the German New Wave was formed, he talks about how they were at a strange spot in society in Germany, because he claimed it felt like they were a fatherless generation and they didn't really have a father to look up to. So in that German New Wave, he kind of like considered him included. They were all kind of like, almost like bastard children that were fatherless and parentless. And so I'm not sure if the attitude of the German New Wave has something to do with that feeling of, post-war. German cinema hadn't fully gotten like redeveloped at that point. So I'm not sure if that kind of goes into where the attitude of his early films come from. And so it's quite interesting though, that like, and also he was obsessed with mountain climbing as well. So he's always been kind of obsessed with people trying to tackle the impossible. And I don't know if that also goes into that, that macho attitude, or it's kind of mysterious. Jerry, in regards to that documentary, I believe, are you referencing Nobody Wants to Play with Me?
Nobody Wants to Play with Me. It's probably early short by him.
It's quite incredible and quite touching. And I remember I came across that during like the birth of YouTube, like when YouTube first happened and you could find like certain small things on YouTube. And I remember seeing that one and it stuck with me. And I found it quite interesting because that was early Herzog. I think that must have been like 72, maybe 73. Yeah. And what I found so amazing by it deals with a subject matter that is so important, dealing with childhood bullying and being the outcast of society. But then it shows early Herzog idiosyncratic natures of, it ends with the child bringing that little girl a crow and they become friends because he presents her with a crow. So what's interesting to me is, even though it's early Herzog where he's still trying to find his voice, that is like the most Herzogian thing that a Herzog film could deal with, aside from having like an iguana and the bad lieutenant for no reason or something like that. So it's like he found like a very like minute moment, like where his voice was starting to appear in that very poetic fashion. That's why I wanted to share it. It's very special.
But it was good because my wife and I watched it and she got creeped out on it. It felt like it was written.
Yeah, I think it probably was. As we all know, he writes most of his documentaries anyways. Yeah. So
yeah, it's very good. It's a good point. And I do recommend, if any of you haven't seen it, just go to the link, and it's just a 12-minute short or 14-minute short. But identity came up. That was really good. And, both Christian Murdy and McLuhan both said that violence is our search for identity. And Herzog on Herzog, wow, what a book. That's Paul Cronin and Herzog together, right? Well, I know Paul, and he told me they rewrote that book 10 years after. So, talk about, you do an interview and then you go change the words around. They have a right to do that, but it's a very interesting thing. How many people put out a book and then rewrite it and shuffle words around. How much, I don't know. So if you have
that almost like Kinski on Kinski, or All I Need Is Love, Herzog helped Kinski write all of the bad parts that Kinski writes about Herzog. Herzog helped
really?
Kinski write all the bad parts.
But I'm saying, is there a percentage of how much has changed in the second edition or the rewrite of the Herzog and Herzog book? But this goes to the search for truth. So we'll start with you, Patrick. We know this thing that Herzog put out. I'm going to symbolize it. And if anyone wants to detail it better, he said there's several types of truth in filmmaking. There's physical truth. That's Michael Moore. You get a belly laugh. There's emotional truth. You watch Ken Burns and you cry. You can sit around PBS TV station show with your parents maybe, and people will get the money shot. They'll cry. But what Herzog was after was ecstatic truth, which was, he claims it's like a monk having an epiphany, or as like Joyce said, epiphanies in everydayness, an epiphany, a revelation. So this is a division of truths. And it's interesting because you flip to Louis Buñuel saying the quote, Rob loves me to quote the most. I'm for anyone who seeks the truth, but I part ways when they claim they found it. Which is Buñuel being tongue-in-cheek and smart-assy, because everybody and their mother would say, I think that's a good quote. And then one person said, that's bullshit, because if I'm going to seek something, it's because I want to find it, and I expect to find it if I really seek it hard. So, Patrick, in this regard, you can go wherever you want with this, but in regards to Herzog saying these three types of quotes, which is sort of accurate in a big picture. This is more like a physical truth. This is more emotional truth. This could be an ecstatic truth. There could be another truth. I always put in Chris Marker, could be another truth. Any comments on that, Patrick? We'll start with you.
I have to think for a sec. I'm more impressed by, I think, ecstatic truth or visionary truth.
So that's
which I think is what he's going for. But I have to be honest. I think everyone in this panel has seen more Herzog films than I have, so I was watching Fitzcarraldo again for this, and I actually went ahead and watched Les Blanc's documentary again.
Nice.
And I've always loved Fitzcarraldo quite a lot. I mean, I just thought I saw it in Paris in 1982, and the same year I saw The Enigma of Caspar Hauser and a bunch of other films, not just Herzog, but other German directors and French directors and so forth. And, I haven't given much thought to it, but as I was rewatching it, what I was thinking is that, on the one hand, coming out of our current political context, it's really hard to watch that movie and not realize all the contradictions that are underlying it. He's going into this world, and on the one hand, he said himself actually that it's one of his greatest documentaries is Fitzcarraldo, because he's actually doing the thing that he's dramatizing. But what struck me is that watching the Les Blanc and all the different comments he's making as he's going through the process, is that he can't really resolve these contradictions. I mean, he is doing everything he says he's not doing. He says he's doing everything not to interfere with the culture, when he's in fact completely interfering with the culture, and actually did it twice, at two different settings, which I don't actually hold that against him. Don't misunderstand me. I think that the film contributes something very powerful about dreams, and about the necessity of desire, of imagination. Is that, which is interesting because his films are so, in my view, verite, i.e. they look like documentaries. But what it's really about is someone with an impossible dream. and he struggles to fulfill it and sort of fails through the most ironic conclusion. And when I was watching Les Blanc again, as I'd seen that a long time ago, I was struck by the fact that he leaves out a lot of stuff. Like, did Herzog actually get the boat over the mountain? You don't know from that documentary. So I always took it for granted because, the movie, you get the impression it really happened, but I don't know. And maybe it did, maybe it didn't. That there's, even in the documentary, and I don't know how much was going on between him and the documentarian, but there are just interesting gaps, So I guess all I'm trying to say is that the point was Herzog, like his character, had a vision, a dream, and and that's what the movie is ultimately about.
Yeah.
Is the necessity of trying to do things and even failing at them. But it's better to fail at doing something that matters than to succeed at doing things that are just the same old, daily routine. So I think that to me is a truth that underlies the film that that seems so realistic and so almost, like I said, almost an anthropological, an ethnographic film.
Yeah.
Which it really isn't, but
yeah,
but it does have that appearance.
Well put, Patrick. So much was brought up there, and like Sammy Beckett says, fail once, then fail again better. But Godard nailed it, because Fitzcarraldo is a fiction film, right? And so Godard said it. He said, fiction films are just documentaries of actors acting. And so, Rob, dude, you're up. And I like that he added aesthetic and visionary truth. You mean, we don't have to just go with the words Herzog said, but elaborate. But any thoughts on this breaking down as physical, emotional, and static truth, Rob?
That's the frame for the question.
I think Courtney or Damien might know. Is that the three he set up in that Minnesota doctrine or whatever? It's like,
yeah, I believe so.
It's three. He said there's three kinds of truths. There's physical, Michael Moore belly laugh. There's emotional, tearing up at Ken Burns, and then there's mine, ecstatic truth, which Patrick brilliantly said aesthetic or visionary truth. So it's like jump off on anything about truth in filmmaking with Godard as a sidekick.
Wow. Okay, great. Let me go to ChatGPT to sum that right up. First off, I want to know if they ever got the boat over the mountain. I mean, that's, can we have an answer to that? Does someone have an answer to that?
I think they did, because the documentary doesn't go to the end of the film. I think, doesn't it end with them having to shoot the movie entirely all over again?
That's actually at the beginning, but no, he kind of skips. Like, they get the boat up to the top of the hill, then they skip to the final scenes when he has the opera on the boat coming down the river.
It's a very frustrating.
So you don't know. At least you don't know from that. I mean, there may be some information out there.
I think you see it in the movie.
Yeah, go ahead. Go ahead.
Just a fun little anecdote regarding this. I actually don't have an answer about that. I would imagine he did, because he certainly likes to talk about how he did. So we'll just take it at that note. But I was working as a journalist years ago, and I had the really awesome opportunity to interview Les Blanc before his passing, specifically about Birding of Dreams. And I was talking to him about that whole situation, and he would tell me that he would get so fed up with all the drama that was going on that set that he would just go away and film his own B-roll and film his own stuff just to kind of decompress and get away from all the drama. And what's really interesting now, when you hear Herzog talk about Burden of Dreams, Herzog says that his favorite parts about that documentary are like Les Blanc filming the ants on the leaves and all the minute details. And what most of that came from was Les Blanc trying to just get away from Kinski and all the insanity, and just like go away. And as it turns out, those were Herzog's favorite shots, not the shots of like them taking the boat down the rapids, but just the ants on the leaves. And I thought that was like a really funny thing, because like hearing it from Les Blanc, that he just sometimes would just have to go get a beer and just go into the woods with his camera and just film nature just to get away.
Yeah. Well, hold on, Rob, 1 second, because Courtney, that's a beautiful thing. So have you written that up anywhere, or is this the first
I can find it. Yeah, it was published in, I think, 2007. I can send you a link. I would have to look
Right,
deep for
but
it.
I'm
It's
just
somewhere
saying
on online.
this is the first time you've ever said it in public on a Zoom.
Yeah.
Oh, great. We got an exclusive here, gentlemen. That was
Yeah, I'll have
really-
to find it. It's when I lived in Boston, I worked for this small magazine, and I was able to. Les Blanc and I come from, I believe. Well, I think he was New Orleans, but he used to work as a cameraman for Gordon's Fish Sticks, and he would do food commercials, and that was right near where my hometown was. So yeah.
But I wanted to say, the thing about Les Blanc is he's such an amazing filmmaker.
Yeah.
And he would enter Ann Arbor Film Festival all the time. And his films look like student films, the way the titles come up, but everybody loves him. And, his picture got in the Oscars when he died as, an important person. So it is cool how he got over on the film industry and said, I'm just a simple kind of
I mean,
guy.
his films. We need to have a discussion about Les Blanc one day, because his films. He's so special because he can take the smallest subject matter, like people who love garlic, and make an entire documentary on garlic, or women that have gap teeth.
Gap
And
teeth.
he does, and they're the most beautiful films.
And he cooks the garlic in the back of the theater, so it's a smell-orama. And we'll definitely do one on. And his son's a great filmmaker too. So Rob, you were up. I'm sorry I cut you off there. Go ahead.
Oh, that's all right. Well, I was just going to say, I mean, I feel like we covered it pretty well, but I was going to say that this sort of inspiration that we're drawing. I mean, the three things that he said there, and the story that you told is very emblematic. It's like you never know what your creative process will inspire in somebody else. It might completely inspire them in unintended ways. And it seems like, a lot of his films are chock full of beautiful unintended moments that he captured. The process is part of it. And, you were mentioning the three ways: intellectual, emotional, physical. Some people might be so reviled by your intellectual thought process that it might hit them physical. It might like a gut punch, or upset them. And so you're just commenting on the uncertainty of the nature of how things hit you and make you feel. And I think that I haven't seen all Herzog's films, but the ones I've seen, there seems to be a bit of that as well. Is he telling you how to feel about Aguirre, or is he presenting this person for you to experience and feel as you do?
It's a good question, Rob. That's super. But it's funny because it's so sort of uncertain, because Patrick added the word aesthetic or visionary truth. You sort of added intellectual, which I usually add. His three are ecstatic, physical, and emotional. I would always add intellectual and say that's where Chris Marker sits in. So, Mike, your take on this talk about truths in Werner's sort of breaking it down.
Yeah, when I think of ecstatic truth, I think of Herzog the poet. More closely aligned with romantic poets, than other film artists. But he's seeking the ecstatic truth, which I take as a poetic truth, trying to capture that which for which there are no words. That's basically
Yeah, that's
I wanted
good.
to pull this book up. He really likes this poet Holderlin.
Mm-hmm.
He often talks about this character. I mean, poet Holderlin, German poet. His influences are largely literary.
Herzog has literary roots, huh? I didn't know that.
Yeah, I mean, he talks about certain films that have influenced him, but he doesn't talk like other filmmakers of his generation. He isn't really a film nerd, you know, like Wim Wenders or Scorsese or, you know, I mean, he certainly has been influenced by certain filmmakers, but I think his influences are more music and more literary than film.
Yeah, he says in many interviews that if someone asks him like what his advice is to make their first film, he'll just tell them to read. That's his advice, to read.
Right.
Jerry, last night I was thinking about the ecstatic truth because years and years of being a Herzog fanatic, I've always tried to like pinpoint exactly like what it is, or like, because it's a poetic truth, we know that. So I think I wrote something down. So this is what I wrote down in regards to the ecstatic truth. Now I could be totally wrong, but this is what I came with.
Yeah.
To find truth by pushing the narrative forward in an imaginative, poetic manner, which blends fact with fiction to realize the truth.
Yeah.
Because Herzog is very notorious for presenting an image that is scripted in a documentary to forward the narrative to determine the truth of that situation or that subject matter. There's a documentary he did called Bells from the Deep, which is really good. And I believe it was filmed in Russia. And there's a scene where there's a woman talking, and I can't remember the subject matter and what she's talking about, but then it cuts to 3 or 2 Russian ice fishermen walk on their hands and knees, crawling on the ice and putting their ears down to the ice. And apparently they were just really drunk fishermen, and they were so drunk they were crawling on the ice, and Herzog filmed them crawling on the ice. And then in the movie, when this woman is speaking, he cuts to that, and it makes this strange kind of abstract, you know, surrealistic vision, but in some weird way it makes sense. I don't know how he's a magician like that.
Yeah. It's the juxtaposition, it's the editing, you know, because he is involved in so much of the film. He might not be the greatest cinematographer or sound man, but he does so many different parts of a collaborative art form, and he's aware of all that. Go ahead, Patrick.
No, I was just going to say that you know, I've only seen a few of his documentaries, and I can hardly remember them, to be honest. But it just almost strikes me as found art, if you know what I mean. I mean, it's like putting a toilet upside down or something in a museum, but not that necessarily. I mean, I was looking a little bit at that what is it, the Silence, and the one about the deaf people.
Oh, Land of Silence and Darkness.
Yeah.
Land of Silence and Darkness. Yeah.
Which I really was struck by that, because what makes his documentaries kind of refreshing is that he doesn't have a lot of voiceover. You know, he doesn't tell you how to feel or what you're supposed to be seeing or what it means or anything like that. He just sort of sits you in these situations where he's found these people and you listen to them, you know, and it's you know, it's raw, and it's not like, you know, pretty cinema. I mean, in the sense of really sharp, well-focused shots, you know, very artistic. They're plain and straightforward, but that's what makes it so unusual. He puts a little bit of stuff in there where, you know, he just tells you with titles, you know, that this is what's happening here or whatever, but it's very minimal. And the found art, and I think in a way, in a film like Fitzcarraldo, it's the same thing. You know, I mean, he's got this historical. If I can just change the subject a little bit, I have a question I've been pondering.
Please.
How would in this day and age where there is so much critique, post-colonial, this, that, so forth and so on, imperialism, the white man becoming the hero, and etc. How would I explain why I find the scenes where Fitzcarraldo is playing the opera and all the little kids are surrounding him and getting into it? And why do I find that interesting and even authentic? And yet I do. And it's not because I think opera is so superior to everything else that it's just inevitable that these kids would be attracted to, European music or something. But simply the idea of giving something, instead of going in and conquering and seizing and owning, you just say, wow, this is, to me, this is the greatest stuff ever. You want to hear it? And they hear it, and it's different and new and fresh and innocent, to be frank. Now, somebody would say, well, you're actually brainwashing them or doing this, but it's just seemed to me that was a very powerful scene, and it justifies some of what happens in that movie, even the failure, because in a certain sense, Fitzcarraldo is trying to do something without even really knowing he's trying to do it. And it's really the director who's trying to do it, something that's impossible.
Yeah.
He's trying to not be a Western conqueror. Okay. But inevitably he is being that. But he's also reminding us in a weird way, this could have been done differently. We didn't have to go in and destroy cultures. We could have said, wow, well, this is our culture. What's yours like? And negotiated and, and found some way to share and collaborate. I mean, I realize that sounds utopian looking at the historical reality, but it just struck me that there is something there, that relates to that it just can't, to my mind, I can't just dismiss it as another, white man hero entering into a native culture. It seems to me it's more interesting than that. And that to me is, again, where the dream, the vision comes through, even though it's in a very realistic mode.
Yeah, Patrick, I'd agree. It's visionary. And it's funny because I got on that kick about the difference between direct cinema and cinema verite, fly on the wall and fly in the soup. When you go to opera, realize that he's playing an opera, but Herzog has chose to direct operas also. And it's a separate thing he does besides writing books and making films. He's directed some operas. And someone once told me opera is where you make the mundane epic. And so you go to this, it crosses over with your word authenticity or the Maisel said, the closer I adhere to reality, the more honest and authentic my tales. So that's like, it sounds a little bullshitty, but it's amazing because I adhere to reality and, because they're making salesmen, and that is fly on the wall. They're just observing. And Jean Rouch, who is supposedly making fly in the soup, cinema verite, he says that he needs authenticity. And his partner, who's an anthropologist, Morin, says on truth, he says the authenticity of life as it is lived. So, Rouch said, if I put a camera between me and you, it's more true than if there's no camera there, which sounds the exact opposite. So it's sort of like, if you get these people to just act and do what they want to do, and I observe it, is that more authentic than what Herzog is saying is, I've got a camera here. Okay, I'll give you supposedly he's paid, as Courtney, has he literally paid people to do things in documentaries? I heard that one.
I'm not sure about that. I mean, I know that he has written things. I'm not sure if there was any financial back and forth.
Yeah. Anyways, any thoughts on that, Mike, this authenticity thing? And you're after it and making your docs as well, or the doc we're working on right now. I mean,
Well, this whole business of objective truth that certain documentarians are after, it doesn't apply to someone like Herzog. Herzog is going for poetry.
Yeah.
But if you're Michael Moore and you're more of a journalistic type of documentarian who's trying to make an expose, then facts do matter. But for
Yeah.
someone like Herzog, he's a poet.
Yeah.
And he's using the tools of cinema to make his poetry, and he uses some documentary techniques, and he uses some I don't know, fictional techniques, and he creates his own thing. But yeah, he's totally different from someone like Michael Moore, who's more of a journalist,
Yeah.
I think.
And yeah, that's good. It's funny because I dumpster dove the DGA magazine, and it's got Herzog there with a guy who lives right down the street from me, Jeremy Kagan. Oh, no, that's the wrong one. Here it is. There's Jeremy Kagan with Herzog. You can see it's got some old schmutz on it from that garbage can still, but they talk about the fire within. And Jeremy's a really good interviewer. He comes to our Finnegan's Wake reading club. And here's Herzog. They actually excerpt what he said. Herzog said, this is about the fire within. Follow your, okay, do you have any advice for young filmmakers who want to pursue documentary filmmaking? Herzog says, follow your vision, be intrepid. Just do it and go out. I see it so often. Since we're in the digital world, recording with a camera doesn't cost any money anymore. I see young filmmakers recording hours and hours in hopes that something is going to happen, and it doesn't. You better know what you're doing. Please shoot what you want for the screen. We are filmmakers, not garbage collectors. Mike, that sounds like my films. I'm a garbage collector, but you better know what you're doing. How do you, we'll start with you, Mike, and then Courtney, and then Patrick. How do you know what you're doing? How does he's saying you better know what you're doing. How did Herzog know what he's doing? And how does one acquire the knowledge to know what you're doing? It's that funny thing I learned from working at George Carlin. We got that flyer. I'm trying to get more control over my spontaneity. It's like, if you try to control what you're doing, doesn't that maybe deter something happening? Or then interviewing Trent Harris in Bieber Trilogy the other day, that guy says, nope, you have to have the theme. You have to you have to really know what you're doing. He was sort of like saying that. So how do you know what you're doing, Mike? In how does one acquire that advice? How does one practice or acquire that advice that Herzog's giving to young filmmakers?
Well, I think it's good general advice, but every filmmaking situation is going to call for different approaches.
Yeah.
I'm thinking of Frederick Wiseman, who made Belfast, Maine. He shot 110 hours, but only, made a 4-hour movie. And so he had to take out so much, but he's sitting there waiting for moments. He's getting footage to hoping that he's going to capture something beautiful. But I don't know, Jerry, man. You just instincts. If you have good instincts, you know what to do in the moment.
Well, that's a good word, instinct. I like that. And it's funny because it's almost like Herzog could diss Wiseman, saying he's a garbage collector. He collected 110 hours of film. You're definitely going to get 4 hours out of that. But it is. I've talked to Wiseman direct in the lobby at USC, and I wanted to do all my 90 minutes worth of questions. And within 5 minutes, he said he answered them all, because he's really not the kind of guy who goes off and explains his films. And he basically said, You know, I make films because I saw Charlie Chaplin and I read Henry James, you know, and he's like, well, no, you're like an observational filmmaker. Nope, I'm trying to tell a story. I make reality fiction is what he calls his stuff. So Courtney, you're a filmmaker. How you better know what you're doing. How did you hear that? Any thoughts?
I'm glad
that as advice. I'm
glad that first of all, I'm glad that Frederick Wiseman got brought up. I was thinking about him through this whole conversation. I was in regards to the difference between what Wiseman does with direct cinema and what Herzog does with the ecstatic truth. Both are in similar wavelengths. I know Herzog would shoot me for saying that, but it would be one must have creative intention and like intuitive nature and a strong passion. So Wiseman can go to a high school and film a bazillion hours of just high school hallways, but he still has an intention and a creative passion. He knows what he's looking for. He's just waiting for it. Herzog knows what he's looking for, and he would do anything to either fake it to get it or maneuver a surrealistic quality to his documentary works to find it. So I think it just has to do with the creative process and the intention and having kind of the intuitive nature of what you're going for and what you want in the film. They're doing the same thing. They're just going about it differently, two different ways. No. You know, they're still presenting a story. They still know what the main theme and the subject that they want to present, but they're the going about it. Between the ecstatic truth, direct cinema, and cinema verite, to me, it's just three different avenues to take, but they're all kind of coming to the same conclusion, you know?
Yeah, really good. And Patrick, I'm interested in your thoughts on that, especially setting it up this way. Kubrick says great art is when you can't clearly see the intention of the maker. And so with Herzog saying, you better know what you're doing. He's almost saying, you know, you better have an intention. It's interesting. He says that you better know what you're doing. You know, please shoot what you want for the screen. We are filmmakers, not garbage collectors. That's some great shit to lay on at the DGA, which I call the Temple of White Supremacy in Hollywood. If you ever go there, totally that. And of all films, we went and saw Brainwash there. Anyways, Patrick, you can go a little into you've made films, but you specifically sent me your book recently, and I appreciate that. And you've written books. So, I mean, how would you take that? You better know what you're doing. How does that apply to your own and your thoughts on that advice from Herzog?
Well, it would differ from one person to the next. I never know what I'm doing in terms of my own writing. I'm always going one step at a time, not really knowing where the next step will take me. And that's just the way I work. And so far it's been okay. But I have a question though, and then I can make a comment. But has Herzog ever said anything about Claude Lanzmann by any chance?
Who is it? I don't even know.
The guy who made Shoah.
Oh, Joel, yeah.
About the Holocaust and so forth.
Yeah. Well, we should. It's simple as Googling the two words, but we can ask Damien too. Let's ask Damien. Damien, do you know this? Go ahead, Patrick. Say the name of the filmmaker. And
Claude Lanzmann. You know, the film Shoah. It's I guess 9 hours.
I've heard of Shoah. I've heard of it.
Has Herzog ever commented on it?
I kind of have a vague feeling that he might have in that book, but probably not, because he didn't really watch other movies.
But anyway, we'll get the question to you next, Damien. But go ahead, Patrick. What you were saying?
No, I was just going to say, to me, I think that's one of the greatest documentaries I've ever seen. And you know, I try to recommend it to people sometimes, and they look at me like I'm crazy. Like it's 9 hours long, you know, and it's about the Holocaust, you know. And I have this guilty feeling because, in some weird way, I actually enjoy it. You know, I mean, not entirely. There's obviously a mixed emotion, but I consider it a work of art. And part of what makes it that is that and it doesn't seem, because it's been imitated since then, but approaching the Holocaust without going back to old photographs and so forth and so on, but just interviewing people from one location to the next and letting them tell their stories, and then having little cutting in with little scenes that are quite aesthetic, and give a kind of vision to what is fairly straightforward documentary. I mean, I just think it's an amazing work of art. Even the way in which the trains become symbolic in that movie, they would literally become a physical symbol, of something that you can't neatly define, and he goes back to the trains over and over and over again throughout the film. I mean, to me, that's where I feel like Herzog is actually moving in that kind of direction, and that's why I wondered, because it's found art, but it's found art that's shaped and into something that's transcends just being what's found. It says more than that, and so I think there's a link there, but I just wondered what he would have thought of it, because I don't pay a whole lot of attention to what filmmakers say about other filmmakers, frankly, anyway, because there's always a certain kind of weird competition and threat, and I don't think they're very reliable on that kind of topic. But I would have thought that he would have found that interesting in some way.
Yeah.
I think going back to Roger Ebert from earlier, he maybe how he does. It's a movie he doesn't even put on his rating system because he felt it was beyond that. Just testifying to what you were saying about it.
Yeah.
You mean Ebert loves Shoal? He says it's so good it's beyond his rating.
Yeah, and also the subject matter is so intense that it's not something to be compared to whatever blockbuster has come out.
But Damon, we didn't really get your take on this one question. I'd love you to weigh in on this. Ecstatic truth is what Herzog said he's after, whereas there's physical truth and emotional truth. What's your take on that, dividing that into truth? That we played it off of Louis Buñuel's "I'm for anyone who seeks the truth, but I part ways when they claim they found it."
Right. Well, I think so those three kinds of truth though are all they're all still part of the larger aesthetic truth, as opposed to the truth he was trying to really be against was the phone book, the accountant's truth, as he would have put it.
He said the words accountant's truth. Yeah. What does that mean when he says accountant's truth?
He's just talking about the facts, the science, the empirical data, whereas the common knowledge, reason, logic, not this other thing, which I think obviously his is above the more basic comedy or even what was the emotional level. It's it's something of a kind of sublime quality, the ecstasy of the ski jumping or the pulling the mountain over, or something like that, which sure. I'm for it. I love his movies. They inspire. But I think those differences I don't think are they're not that large. I mean, I think he has those emotional. Well, he really doesn't as much, but he has comedic moments that operate on a more unconscious level.
Yeah. So I mean, well, what about him being shot during the interview in LA?
Yeah. Classic.
And I mean, is that a setup or what? You think it's a setup, or it's staged, or it's total random that it happened?
Who know? You know, who really knows?
But I mean, your hunch, your guess, if you had to go one way or the other, one hair of a,
I want to believe it's real. I'll say that.
That's good. Okay, Courtney, what's your
fine.
take?
I think it's real. I think
Real?
I think it is. I think it is. I mean, weirder things have happened to me when I lived in LA. So I mean, anything can happen. I mean, thank God I've never been shot at, but I've definitely weird things have happened. I do think it's real, and I think the funniest part about that clip is his response afterwards when he shows his wound and he's wearing pink underwear, pink boxers, and he says, "I've been shot with larger bullets."
Well, just so you guys have a chance, Patrick and Mike, do you know what we're talking about?
Not really.
Okay, Mike.
Yeah, I know.
Okay, Mike, explain what happened really briefly, and then tell us what you're feeling.
Well, he was doing an interview, and in the middle of the interview, he feels something on his side, and he realizes that he's bleeding. And I think there was some guy in a building close by who was taking pot shots, or I don't know the fine details of the story, but he basically wants to continue with the interview. He's and I don't think he made that up. The Herzog today doesn't play around with those kind of shenanigans. I think maybe when he was young, he might have, not staged it, but maybe made more out of it or stayed. But Herzog today doesn't have time to mess around with these kind of things.
Yeah. Yeah, it's interesting. So let's go round robin with if you could ask Herzog a question right now, or what question remains unresolved for you in the regards to our little exploration of Herzog and your, paying attention to his films over the year. We'll start with you, Courtney.
I would like to know his thoughts on the afterlife. I would like to know what Herzog thinks about because I know he went through a long period of Catholicism, and I'd be curious. I would like to talk to him about religion and his thoughts on the afterlife. That's what I would be curious about.
Very cool. Patrick.
I think I'm going to pass on this one. I don't think I have an interesting question I could ask him.
But no worries, and I thank you for revisiting the films you did, because it's been many years since I've really explored Herzog. And again, I thank Courtney for bringing it up. But I've seen the internet film and the cave art film, but I know I've missed so many good ones. The Green Ants film is supposed to be great. There's like so many, and the Gene Scott film is unbelievable. That is a must. To think that Gene Scott's daughter is Rebecca, whatever her name is, who is Leonard Cohen's girlfriend. Did you know that? Gene, that is like too surreal. Okay, Mike, any question unresolved for you, or what you would ask him?
I really like what Courtney would ask him, so I kind of want to steal that from you, Courtney. That is actually the only thing that I care about.
Hey, property is theft, Mike.
but I would, if I were in a car with them on a long trip and we were just talking about anything, I would ask him, can you, list for me your 50 favorite books, or your most favorite books. He always mentions 2 or 3 books, but I'd really like to find out what he truly loves as far as books.
Yeah. It's quite amazing how many filmmakers are so coming out of the book tradition. What's his name? D.W. Griffith invented the feature film pretty much, and he carried, according to McLuhan, he carried a copy of Mark Twain around. No, he carried a copy of Charles Dickens around in his back pocket. And then Wiseman saying, "Yeah, I'm just trying to make Henry James." That's on and on. Okay, Damien, what would you ask Herzog, or what question remains unresolved?
I've gotten the chance to ask him a couple of questions. So,
Where at?
At different screenings that he's done around. Most recently, actually, I did try to ask him a McLuhan type question because he had just put his book out, so they were showing all of his movies again last summer, and he was at one of them, and at the Aguirre Fitzcarraldo screening, I asked him, what differences he found between making a novel, for the first time as opposed to a movie, and he said there was no difference.
Really? That's amazing, because I think that Jonathan Demme interview is really good. One of them says, what's the difference between directing an opera and making a film? He says, there's a lot of difference, and that's interesting. What was the other question you asked him?
At other screenings, I asked him when he did his Gorbachev movie. I asked him if he thought nuclear war was inevitable, and at first he said no, but then as he kept kind of talking and explaining his answer, he kind of went back on that, because he explained how he's like, of course, anything can be prevented, even and he talks and he mentions how back in feudal Japan, when the gun was introduced, or at the end of samurai lord Japan, whatever, when the gun had made its way over, all the lords had basically agreed to get rid of their guns, because it had just totally changed everything, and all of their men were dying, and so there was a period where they just all agreed to not use guns, obviously, and then he goes, obviously that ended, so he kind of, even in that example, he kind of goes back on it, but he still maintain his thought that it could be prevented.
Yeah, I think he taught me a lot, like Frank Zappa's taught me, to embrace contradiction and don't be afraid to realize that that's what life's all about. You fall down, you get back up. It doesn't mean you have to be like consistent, but you want to be true to yourself. But who's defining what self is? And our friend Peter Coogan said he'd ask Herzog, why did you make America your home? Not the evident reasons like, the businesses are, why did you make Los Angeles your home in specifically? Not because the business or your daughter or your wife's, blah, 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 like the practical known, but like the deeper reason. Why do you really want? Has he ever addressed that, Courtney or Damien? Do you know where it's not just the evident, not the evident reasons, but a little deeper?
I think it's in the Henry Rollins in a lot, but one of the funnier moments is on the Henry Rollins show. He does mention that he thinks Los Angeles is the most, Damien, correct me if I'm wrong, does he say it's the most wholesome city in America, or it's the most either like spiritually wholesome city in America? It's like what most people believe as being like the opposite of what Los Angeles is. And even Henry Rollins in the interview seems a little caught off guard by Herzog's response. He says it's like the greatest city in America, and it's the only place he would ever want to live, and it's quite strange. But I agree with him. I love LA too.
No, his answer is that it has to do with how everywhere you go, you could turn around another corner and there's something completely different from what was on the other street. There'd be a house that's a pirate ship, or stuff like that. And especially I think he's even being compared to San Francisco, because San Francisco is seen as the cutting edge, the Bay Area. But he says LA is really where all the interesting twists and turns and nooks and crannies are. But it could just be a cop out for him to be close to the film industry.
He may just like the weather.
That's
that's what he that those are the excellent ones. He does like the weather. And then what were you going to say, Mike?
No, he gets a lot of love here in America or LA. You know,
Yeah.
I have a German friend who said in Germany he's respected, but he's not loved like he's loved in America.
Mm.
So he
Yeah,
probably loves everyone loving him.
that's why the shooter just hit him in the butt and skimmed him rather than shot him in the head. Yeah, go ahead, Courtney.
I know we're running out of time, but one thing I maybe next time we can get on this, but I would love to go further into his use of music, his collaboration with Florian Fricke at Popov. And speaking of opera, and we know that he's directed many operas, he did a great documentary called Gesualdo, The Death of Five Voices, about the opera singer Gesualdo. And it's one of his more rare documentaries. I think it's probably on YouTube now, but it's one of his great music pieces. And it really shows his love and passion for music. And his collaboration with Florian Fricke and Popov. I think that's some of the great soundtrack work that's ever been done.
It's really good. And, I know
just a side note.
Yeah, no, it's a great suggestion. I'd love to go deeper into this part too, because all the questions I asked you, Courtney, I asked Henry Kaiser, the great guitarist, really great guitarist, and he's an underwater diver. He was working with David Lindley on that soundtrack, and then Herzog saw that footage of his underwater stuff, and he goes, "This is amazing." And Henry goes, "That's not very good." And he goes, "He used it." And so, Henry's worked in his music world too. So we could talk to Henry about it. But it is great because he quotes that Peru quote saying, "Perseverance is where the gods dwell." So, he is someone who's persevered, and he still is making films like consistently. And one of his latest, I'm going to quote as we go out, but I wanted to go round robin one more time if we could. And Lewis Carroll says, "I believe as many as 6 impossible things before breakfast." And one of Herzog's aspirations is to work as efficiently as possible. He says, "I do the doable." So, this idea of possible and possibility. How does one work as efficiently as possible? We'll start with you, Damien. And, you can apply it in the Herzog realm or in the general philosophical realm.
Well, I'm reminded of it's a very tautological answer, but I'm reminded of a William S. Burroughs quote where he mentions some culture who they work to do something with the least amount of excess possible, which would be that. And actually, but also now reminded of the McLuhan quote where he talks about how there's a culture that doesn't have art because they do everything as well as they can, which is kind of contradictory to what Herzog's saying.
Yeah, he's saying there's no Burroughs. Yeah, that's the Balinese have no word for art. They do everything as well as they can. But Burroughs is saying there's these people who work as less. You mean they're like slack?
Directly, like they work to be as direct as possible. So basically, as efficient as possible.
Efficient, not slackers. You mean they work to be as efficient? Yeah. It's that word efficiency is really what the question's about. What does it mean to work as efficiently? Because it seems like that's all. Everybody wants to make the world a better place, I think, in general, in their lives or however. But how they go, we want things to be effective and efficient. It's like, who's determining what that is? So we all sit around and going, so we invent stuff and then it works backwards. We invent cars and TV and it ruins the world. And then we go, whoa, we were just trying to be more effective or more efficient. So motorized.
Well, they weren't. I mean, you're not really trying to be more efficient. That's just what you say.
Well, that's yeah. That's your PR branding cut line. Okay, Mike, what's your take on this?
Well, Herzog, I think, just turned 80.
Yeah,
he's in his 80s, and there's no sign that he's slowing down, and perhaps he feels that he wants to do more films before he can't do films anymore.
Yeah.
It makes me sad. I hope he lives another 20 years and is making films, makes another 20 films. But he is getting older, so maybe he's thinking time is running out. I need to spend every moment of my life working on my work.
Yeah.
That's how I imagine he's thinking, but who knows?
He's dedicated. And look at UB Blake's a good example. The dude smoked cigarettes, played piano, and he played up till he was 100 years old. He didn't weasel out. He just kept going. Okay, Patrick, any work as efficiently as possible?
I suspect that's just a European point of view, in Hollywood. I mean, you've got James Cameron, and who makes Martin Scorsese look like he's efficient. And I mean, they're just endless budgets, whereas European filmmakers tend to, despite Fitzcarraldo being a little bit of a crazy project, to work within much more limited means and to it's like even Hitchcock was like that. He wanted to keep making films, so he would make films as economically as possible. And his style was efficient in the sense that he didn't want to rely too much on cheap effects. He wanted the effect to be the process of cutting and putting it together, montage. I suspect that's what he's got in mind. And I think that's a very European point of view on American cinema, which looks overblown. I think sometimes the overblown is worth it, but a lot of times it's not. And to Europeans, I think it looks sort of like sloppy.
Really, really great comments, Patrick. Thank you. Go ahead, Courtney.
Efficiency. I can only speak as being a filmmaker. I would say efficiency. Cook for your own cast and crew. Be your own caterer.
That's more home. That's like comfort food. That's like I'll tell you a great line. Being a documentarian, I asked. I think it was Sam Green made the Weather Underground film. He got nominated for an Oscar, and he's a good filmmaker. He's still kicking them out like crazy. And I says, why would you sell your film to PBS rather than HBO? So that was a big thing. Sheila Nevins, buy your film, you get HBO, you get more money. PBS, you get, this other coverage. This one person said, if you sell your film to HBO, you get to sleep in a hotel on the tour. If you sell your film to PBS, you crash on your friend's couch. but Sam Green said no. He got to own his film after PBS. Like a little long. It was the ownership thing that HBO owned it longer or something like that. So. Yeah, I mean Herzog. I think it's big business. He owns all his films pretty much. He's always had some sort of, finagle to get enough budget to do his films. It doesn't like he's really struggling. It seems he like this last film, or one of his latest is called Fireball: Visitors from Darker Worlds. Have you guys seen this? About the meteors?
Yeah, I saw it. It's very similar to the volcano one.
And it's his latest, or it's a couple years old, or is it new?
I think I saw it 2 years ago.
2 years ago, yeah. And it's about science, history, and mythology, and it's made with another filmmaker. But the trailer has great lines in it. This one woman says, "We are all stardust," because it's like the meteor comes and turns us back to stardust. And it wipes out life, but then it also delivers the seeds of life. So it's that, cyclical kind of Mobius strip. You live and you die, you fall and you get up, you fail and then you succeed. So anybody have any closing comments? I really appreciate your participation today, gentlemen. It's really been fun. Go ahead, Courtney.
Yeah, actually, in regards to the topic of efficiency and obtaining budgets and stuff, there's a really good book that I would suggest everybody read if you haven't already. It's called "Every Night the Trees Disappear," and it's a journalistic account of Herzog making Heart of Glass, and it goes into quite some amazing detail about how he was able to get money and kind of in maybe not the most clean manners, but like doing what needed to be done to get the budget he needed to make that movie. But it kind of it's interesting because we see him from Burden of Dreams and the Fitzcarraldo fiasco, and this is a book kind of it's more down to earth and grounded about how he is going about getting money and doing all this stuff. So I highly recommend that.
But it's not written by him, or it is written by him?
No, it's not written by him. It's written by a journalist who followed him during the pre-production stages, I believe, of making Heart of Glass. Yeah.
Good, thank you. So let's do a bonus question since that was so good. Courtney, we'll start with you. How did Herzog shape your behavior?
Oh, well, I mean, I started watching his films so early that he was one of the reasons why I wanted to become a filmmaker. So I guess that's a pretty big shape of behavior, kind of like inspired me to do what I'm doing right now. Definitely one of the main inspirations cinematically.
How cool
and I also
that?
now know how to. I also know how to pick locks and.
By the way, who brought that up? I think you brought it up is what McLuhan said he was a lot. He's a safe cracker, and you listen to the ball bearings fall. So it's a question of listening and adjusting, and that's how you have your epiphany. So he says he was a safe cracker. So that was good. I learned how to pick locks. Damien, how did Herzog shape your behavior?
Well, definitely my fascination or habit, or haven't really kept up with it, of walking, traveling on foot, was majorly inspired by him.
Because he does that in a film or in real life, or why?
In real life, and he encourages it. So I think that, and trying to read more. Not that I wasn't before him, but that emphasis helped.
You mean kill your TV and go for a walk, read books?
Well, just traveling on foot is the only way to truly see a place.
It's great. It's a great suggestion. Yeah. Okay, Mike, how did Herzog shape your behavior?
Well, just as a filmmaker, the first Herzog film I saw was Strozek, and it still remains one of my favorite films. And I watch it maybe once a year. And speaking of great soundtracks, Strozek is one of my favorite films of Herzog for the soundtrack alone. Sonny Terry, Chet Atkins, and Floyd Kramer.
Wow.
One soundtrack. But he's one of the great film heroes. I love him. I'll always watch his films. They'll always inspire me. Yeah, that's all I have to say.
That's good. Okay, Patrick.
I hope he lives another 20 years.
Yeah, that's a great wish. Okay, Patrick, how did Herzog shape your behavior?
Well, I think you can already guess that he really hasn't shaped my behavior. I'm sorry
Don't be sorry.
If I had to tell you what films had shaped my behavior, I would be embarrassed, and so we
will.
No.
Tell us one, Patrick, because it's good. We love having you, and you're like a.
Well, I think I'm older than I think I'm older.
I know,
than all
but
of you,
you're you are a truly important part of these salons, our Godard and this. So this has been great. But just tell us one title that's shaped your behavior.
Okay.
And how?
On the Waterfront.
And how did it shape you? What did it do to you?
It's just one of those movies in the 50s when I was growing up. I was a little kid, and it just imprinted me. I mean, to this day, I mean, to me, it's just, and plus there are movies that resonate with your own life in subtle ways, not identical reflections, you understand, but just subtle resonances. And that movie was one of them, and there were others like Rebel Without a Cause as well, and a lot of movies in the 50s that affected me that way. Later, I became too, you know what I mean, self-conscious and critical to allow films to affect me that way, except on occasion. Like with the first time I saw Bonnie and Clyde, for example, I was still open to something that sort of blew me away. But the first time I saw a Truffaut film, that didn't really happen. The first time I saw a Herzog film, that didn't happen. I mean, they were more like you know, they were different and they were really interesting.
Yeah.
Particularly, see, I actually like Wim Wenders a lot. And,
no, Wim Wenders is good.
But I kind of like the films that were sort of imitations of American cinema. Yeah, like my
Goalie's Kicker,
My American Friend, and him, you know, and so forth and so on. But they weren't films that, you know, affected my life, and those or influenced my behavior particularly. So but I may be understanding it differently, you know.
No, it is good because it's something we can't deny. I mean, what shaped my behavior is religiously watching Wizard of Oz every year on the TV set. And then when I got to films, or, you know, when I got to university and I watched it on the big screen, I knew where every commercial was supposed to be placed in the film. And so it's like, how did it shape your behavior? It opened me up to learning there's other types of cinema, you know, especially experimental cinema being in Ann Arbor. And then, you know, to the point where I loved the documentary on Elia Kazan by Marty Scorsese. If you haven't watched that, that's amazing, you know, to hear Elia Kazan
I've seen it.
saying to Marty, "That's a stupid question." and then he answers it. Same thing Craig Baldwin did to me. He's, you know, "That's a stupid question." Then he would answer it. But I think it's great, like Damon, you know, you spend time pursuing talking to Herzog and sussing out what he says and how he handles these people. He's constantly being interviewed. It's pretty amazing. And, you know, from, you know, Jonathan Demme to Colbert to Henry Rollins, it's like pretty refreshing that we have that sort of dialogue where it becomes part of who he is. And then Colbert says, "Well, now you're a character and you're, you know, mocked on The Simpsons." And he's like, you know, he sort of discounts it. And people, you know, it's like what I say about most people when they make a documentary, say on a rock band, then the rock band becomes their documentary because that's all people have as a reference, sort of. You know, and it's like they know they can see all this other stuff, but it's like, oh, that's who that is. And that's so much more than, you know, what 90 minutes, or if it's even a 4-hour doc, there's so much more than that. But we tend to think of cinema defining what something is, you know. We believe it's true. It's all an illusion. So let's do a future let's do some future salons. I think music, just even general, Courtney, music and movies is a good one, and bring in her. And any other suggestions, Patrick, you know, anything you want to suggest, or Mike or Damien, we're open for it. It helps us like do these things where we return to thinking about it. You know, it's been fun to go into the Herzog, you know, tunnel for a couple days and just absorb it, you know. So thank you so much, gentlemen. Anyone have a closing comment? Otherwise, I'll hit the end broadcast button, and thank you again so much.
Thank you.
Nice meeting you guys.
Yeah, nice meeting you too. Bye.